I say this because, early in my career, I knew people who ran afoul of this rule, generally because they were taking secondhand information. Somebody told them what somebody else had told them, and everybody agrees this is probably okay. Friend of the channel and regular viewer Eric wrote in with a great question that's not just pertinent to him, but might be pertinent to you too. Basically, Eric is in that phase of his career where he's building time towards his commercial certificate, and then he'll want to build more time to become competitive in the hiring market. So he has a very good question. How can I lower my costs while not holding out? There's two terms you're going to have to know here. One is pro-rata, which is Latin. Yeah, you're smart. You know Latin now. Pro-rata means proportionately. If you've got two people flying in an airplane, the proportionate cost would be roughly half. I say roughly because it's not exactly in all cases. We'll get to that. Holding out is a term from the FAA, and holding out is a little tough, understandably so, because the FAA doesn't really define it. As a matter of fact, holding out is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. There is no definitive way to say this is holding out and that is not. But there are some basic guidelines, and advertising in any form, whether it's in the penny saver in your local community or on social media, if you put something out there that says, hey, I'm willing to fly you around in exchange for some cash, some sort of compensation, that's holding out. You're pretending you're an airline when you're not. There is Part 91 that we operate under, and there's Part 135 and 121, airlines and charter services. You're going to be Part 91, and this is kind of a big thing. Even as someone like Eric works toward the commercial certificate, and maybe you say, hey, I am a commercial pilot, just like Pat and Jamie. Well, yeah, you are. But when you go jump in the local rental aircraft, or even if you own your own airplane and you're flying around, or the flying club airplane, whatever it is, you're probably exercising the private pilot privileges of your commercial certificate. You can't just charge people to go flying. You can have them pay the pro-rata cost of a flight if there's a common purpose to the flight. That's the third thing we kind of have to understand to stay in the good graces of the FAA and make sure that we really can build our skills, build our logbook, and cut our cost by when it's appropriate, allowing other people to pay part of the cost of the flight. Let's get into it. This episode is brought to you by Rexair Professional Pilot Academy of Sebring, Florida. Rexair is a soup-to-nuts outfit that's got housing, classroom space. They fly RV-12 aircraft that are brand new factory built. They've got everything a flight student needs to be successful. So give them a call, 309-397-6191, or drop them a line, info@rexair.net. Rexair Professional Pilot Academy, Sebring, Florida. Now, we all know that a private pilot, in almost all cases, there are very few exceptions, cannot fly for compensation or hire. Compensation does not mean somebody's handing you money necessarily. Compensation can come in a lot of ways, and that compensation doesn't even have to be paid to you directly. There are situations where you might do a favor for somebody who's doing a favor for you, and those are going to be considered compensations. That's not something you want to get into. So let's look at how we can fly for real with a passenger who is paying a pro-rata share of the cost of the flight. That allows us to build time and lower cost. And you never know what kind of interesting people you're going to haul along with you. Hopefully they're your friends and people you actually know. It's a little difficult to explain how these total strangers who are paying for part of the flight, that's not a commercial activity. There is an FAA document that's going to help you with this. And luckily, unlike a lot of FAA documents, this one's actually pretty clear and easy to read. AC 61-142. That is specifically about how you can avoid holding out and how you can correctly and legally carry passengers in your plane who are paying a pro-rata share of the cost of that ride. For example, let's say I decide I want to fly up to Savannah, Georgia, just because it's a pretty flight and I like the neighborhood. If I'm at the coffee shop and I mention, hey, I'm flying up to Savannah, Georgia tomorrow. I'm expecting great weather. I think this is going to be terrific. If one of my table mates says, oh, I wish I had known about that, I have to be in Savannah tomorrow too. I promised my sister I was going to take her shopping before her wedding, and it's kind of a big deal to me, but man, it's a long drive. That's common cause. I'm going to Savannah for one reason, he's going to Savannah for another reason, but we were both going to go to Savannah. So I can tell my friend, hey, if you want, you can hop in and fly up with me and I'll fly you home. Would you be willing to pay a pro-rata share of the flight? Of course, I can take him without him paying anything if I'm that generous, but I can also ask him to pay a pro-rata share, and that's perfectly legal. Now, at the same time, if I was sitting at that same coffee shop table and said, hey, I'm flying up to Savannah, Georgia tomorrow, the weather's supposed to be great, does anybody want to go? And somebody goes, yeah, I'll got nothing going on, I'll go with you. That is not common cause. That's going to be a problem, because while I have a reason to go to Savannah, the other person did not. So I could carry them as a passenger, perfectly okay. They can come with me. But if I ask them to pay a pro rata share, now I'm in violation of the rules, because that's not a common cause. They weren't going there. I've basically solicited a paying passenger, and I'm not allowed to do that. This is where we get into an odd thing that people often don't think of. I may be a commercial pilot, but the concern is, what is the operation? Who is that? Do I own the plane? In that case, do I have a 119 certificate that allows me to engage in commercial operations? If I don't, then I'm probably not allowed to engage in commercial operations. That makes sense, right? If I'm a commercial pilot and I fly for a 135 carrier or a 121 carrier, sure, I get on with my nice crisp white shirt and my epaulettes, and they pay me to fly this airplane. But that's because my employer has a certificate to do commercial operations. Having a commercial pilot certificate means I can work for them, but it doesn't mean I'm a commercial operator. And that's something we have to keep in mind. Now, when I say we can split a pro rata share of the cost of the flight, that comes with a caveat. FAR 61-113C is very specific that only certain costs can be shared. Now, that includes fuel, oil, airport fees, and the cost of renting the aircraft. So if I have to pay for a tie down at the other end, that's fair. The fuel and the oil I need to put in the aircraft to make that flight. If I'm renting the airplane or paying the actual operating cost of a flying club aircraft, I can split that cost. But if I was flying high enough that oxygen was required, for example, I cannot split the cost of the oxygen. I'm going to have to eat that myself, because it's not listed in one of the available expenses in 61-113C. It's a regulation. It's not somebody's opinion. So I have to be kind of careful about that, because I really don't want to be putting a lot of effort into building time, building experience, building my logbook so that I'm competitive in the commercial market, and then get a violation on my record because I did it wrong. That's not ideal. By the way, while passengers on the flight are allowed to reimburse me for a pro rata share of those costs, it can only be the passengers on the flight. It has to be shared with my actual passengers. If I take two guys with me on a golf trip because their dad, he can't make it, and then when we get back from the flight, dad pays the pro rata share, no bueno, can't do that. It has to be the two guys on the airplane. Now, I suppose there's probably some bookkeeping thing, and if dad gives them their allowance and that covers the cost, that's fair. But it's got to come from the passengers, not somebody related to or who knows or employs the passengers. It's got to be the passengers themselves. So if you're in the same boat with Eric, and I sure was at one time in my career, keep in mind, you can build time by flying by yourself. You can build time by flying with a passenger who's not paying for the flight. You can build time by flying with another pilot, one of you under the hood. There are some rules where you can both log PIC time for that time when you're wearing the view limiting device, because the person controlling the airplane is logging PIC as the sole manipulator of the controls. The other person is logging PIC just for that portion because they're safety pilot. And you can split a pro rata share of the cost of a flight with a passenger, provided it's a proportionate share. You're not holding out, which means you didn't advertise you're willing to do this, and there's some common cause. You both had a reason to go to the same place, even if you weren't going to do the same thing. If one of you is going to a movie and one of you is going to a ballet recital and you're both going to fly back together, that's fine. You had a reason to go there. But those terms, pro rata, holding out, and common cause, but those terms are a big deal. Pro rata share, which means proportionate, and holding out, which is not specifically defined by the FAA, but taken seriously. If you're advertising in any way that you're willing to take people for a few dollars, you're probably going to find yourself talking to somebody from the FAA in a very uncomfortable conversation you really wish you weren't part of. I say this because, early in my career, I knew people who ran afoul of this rule, generally because they were taking secondhand information. Somebody told them what somebody else had told them, and everybody agrees this is probably okay. Just go read AC 61-142, and you'll know what's considered a pro rata share, what parts of the cost can be pro rata shared, and what does constitute holding out. Hey, I wish you the best with this. I think you could do well with this. I know other people have in the past, and it is a great way to be able to share the joy of flight with family and friends and not have to shoulder the entire cost yourself. I'll see you right back here on Mad Props Aero next week.